Okay.
Hey everyone, welcome to a special National Signing Day version of the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
All right, Joe, before we get into the actual signing day, I want to talk about a little bit about Quinn Ewer. He's a quarterback that really exemplifies the effects that NIL and the transfer portal has had on watering down the significance of National Signing Day and to the changing college football landscape in general. First off, the guy kind of looks like the great Oklahoma quarterback, linebacker from the 1980s. Of course, you see him in all the Dr. Pepper commercials with his amazing bleach blonde mullet that Quinn Ewer has. And this guy has never taken a snap in college football, yet he's made multiple millions of dollars off name, image, and likeness. He's out of Texas. He went to Ohio State, sat behind C.J. Stroud, never took any snaps. And Sark gets him to transfer from Ohio State to Texas. And suddenly Texas not only adds in this guy, they also have a top 5 recruiting class in actual regular recruiting. And I just think that the Quinn Ewer, unlike old Bill Bosworth, who spent all of his 4 years at Oklahoma and famously got second to Bo Jackson in the Heisman Trophy race, this is a guy who's moved around a little bit. But I will say this about Quinn Ewer. While you can argue who has a better mullet, he's going to be making more money than Bill Bosworth ever did in college, at least on the Bucs.
Oh, no doubt. And huge for Texas, coming off a tumultuous season to get this type of talent with recruiting too.
Right. And it's a great story what Sark has done with the recruiting in Texas based off their 5-7 season that saw them lose their last 6 games. And also, it's something that should be celebrated in Longhorn country. The problem is on the other side of the state, Texas A&M has the number 1 recruiting class in America right now. And so Jimbo could do the unthinkable, not just beat Nick Saban on the field. He could beat him in recruiting this season, which is unthinkable. You can do one, but not the other. Kirby's beaten him in recruiting a couple times, or at least, there's been split services on it, but he's never beaten him on the field. And, of course, Auburn's beaten him on the field multiple times. Ole Miss has, but none of us have ever even had a better recruiting class than he had. So what Jimbo could be doing is he could be taking that next step towards really making A&M a powerhouse. They haven't made the SEC West champ. They haven't won the SEC West yet. They haven't made the SEC championship. But this certainly is going to make a difference. And Joe, I've been looking at their recruiting class. What I find so impressive is what A&M has done. And, obviously the leaving of Mike Elko to become Duke's head coach is not affecting this. They are getting an amazing defensive line. Like, I'm looking at this class right now. Walter Nolan is the number 2 overall player in America, and he is a defensive lineman out of Tennessee. So that's a pretty like long distance recruiting he's doing there. And then you go down as number 2 ranked player that he's got, number 16 nationally, a defensive lineman out of Lakeland, Florida. That's probably 18 hours from Lakeland, Florida to College Station, Texas. So just amazing what Jimbo's doing, and he's building just an amazing defense. And then something we didn't mention in the last episode, he was transferring is Zach Calzada, the guy who was the starting quarterback for Texas A&M for most of the year. Well, maybe it could be just not the return of Haynes King from injury, but Connor Weidman from Cypress, Texas, who's a 5-star quarterback, number 19 overall player in America, that's also signed with Texas A&M. I mean, this is just a like from top to bottom, just beautiful class by Jimbo Fisher. And I mean, really, like I said, the defensive line is what's just blowing me away. 4 out of his top 5 players, defensive linemen. There's an Anea White from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, an edge rusher. And then he's got a guy, Anthony Lucas, who's a defensive lineman from Scottsdale, Arizona. So, I mean, the national footprint that Texas A&M is recruiting from is just absolutely impressive. And especially this defensive line is going to be killer in a couple of years.
Oh, absolutely. Like, it's the combination of not only top-heavy talent with a defensive front, but also the depth of what you're going to get with the number 1 class. And obviously, it's no secret that Nick Saban's a good coach, but it's also unsurprising, with the success Alabama's had over the years, that they continuously get that number 1 class. And so you're right. Like it kind of could gradually allow A&M to maybe get the upper hand more consistently by capitalizing on this talent over the next few years. And, the A&M program, the last 2 seasons, they've been right up there in the SEC West. In 2020, they won a New Year's Six Bowl, just had the one loss to Alabama. In this past season, even though they were 8-4, a lot of the games they lost were kind of puzzling, head-scratching losses to what you would think on paper were inferior teams. And, for a while, they were like a top 10 team. And so I think that this is all about that next step for Texas A&M and Jimbo Fisher.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the next step. Is they've been recruiting better the last few years, but they're really taking that next dive up right now. And Joe, since this is my show, I don't want to talk about Alabama and Georgia's recruiting classes. They're number 2 and number 3. We know they do it every year. It's fantastic. Let's move on to some other ones that we find a little bit more interesting on this show. The Bamer podcast is somewhere else if you want to listen to it. Joe, one that we talked about Texas. I mean, this is something that's really fascinating what Sarkisian has done. We talked about him, of course, bringing in Quinn Hewer, but he's getting solid 5-star player, the offensive line with Kelvin Banks, a 6'5", 300-pound O lineman who's number 15 overall in America. If you're going to get in the bleach blonde mullet, you better protect that mullet. And that's what he's doing with his biggest player. And then really what I'm looking at with this, all of the top level players that he's getting, different from what A&M is doing in the state of Texas, which is what you need to do when you're the Texas coach. You don't have to go outside Texas to get the best talent. And when Mac Brown had that thing rolling, when of course Darrell Royal had it going back in the 70s and 80s, you put a lock down in the state of Texas. Everyone that grows up in the state of Texas wants to wear that burnt orange, right? So go ahead and take advantage of that. And it looks like Sark is starting to keep these players in Texas. As I'm looking at the top 5 ranked guys he has in his class are all from the state of Texas.
Yeah, I mean, you've got 5 or 6 states worth of talent in the state of Texas, if not more, with the size of that state and all of the population. And I think the trouble over the last decade for the University of Texas football has been that they've lost a lot of recruiting battles with the likes of Baylor and A&M and even Houston, got a 5-star recruit a few years ago, and TCU. And so it's kind of getting back to that point where the best players are going to consistently go to Texas, which is going to be key for Sark. And I like what you said about that recruiting class. Anytime I evaluate a class, I'll always like it when they're getting really good pass rushers and offensive linemen. I feel like those are always going to be great foundational pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I liked about A&M's class. And I'm looking at Sark's class, and he's bringing in a lot of different kinds of players. He's got offensive linemen, cornerback. He's got a wide receiver that's very highly ranked, and then a safety. So he's definitely, you can tell that Texas had a lot of concerns, and he's addressing a lot of them. So we'll see if Sark can turn this thing around. I'm glad that, Texas didn't get so itchy with the trigger finger they got rid of him after 1 year, because looks like he's at least bringing in the talent. So let's see if he can do something with it.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, Joe, speaking of even newer people than Sark, there was a lot of talk about, is Marcus Freeman really ready to be a head coach? Notre Dame didn't go out when Brian Kelly left to go get Luke Fickell, which apparently the word is he really liked Notre Dame, and that was one he would have thought about. They didn't try to get Urban Meyer out. Of course, no one wants to touch Urban Meyer with a 20-foot pole right now, but they didn't get people like this. And they promoted from within. And, Marcus Freeman has this, you can see the way the players loved him, and he's supposed to be an amazing recruiter. Well, Joe, that's definitely transpired to what we have on signing day, as Notre Dame is sitting there with the number 7 overall class. And of course, one of the reasons Brian Kelly left to go to LSU was allegedly he could not get the kind of players that you can win a national championship, right? He couldn't get guys that can compete with SEC players. Well, let me tell you this, if you routinely get top 10 recruiting classes, then you are getting those kind of players. So maybe this is a good showing for why Notre Dame did promote from within and get Marcus Freeman, because obviously he was the main guy on the recruiting trail based on what you saw sign on signing day today.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that he and the Notre Dame program and the players and the new recruits, they're all out to disprove, the narrative that Brian Kelly instilled on the program, allegedly, showing that you couldn't win there and he had to go to LSU. They want to prove that they can win a national title at Notre Dame. And this is the first step. And I really think that, at the end of the day, when you have a season where you go 11-1, it is hard, if your coach leaves, to go out and get somebody different, because, you've had a lot of success within, and the players were completely behind this. And even at the time, Notre Dame was trying to decide where they were going to be as far as the placement for the college football playoff rankings. And so to me, it kind of made sense based on all those factors to roll with Freeman, and we'll see how he goes from here.
Yeah, Joe, and you can definitely see the defensive imprint on what Freeman's going to bring to Notre Dame as the head coach, because his top two signed players, both linebackers, including a Jalen Sneed out of Hilton Head, South Carolina. So he's from the beach, went all the way down there to get a 6'2", 210-pound linebacker, number 35 overall player in America. And, Joe, what we were talking about earlier with South Carolina, that shows you right there. There's a kid from Hilton Head. They couldn't get to stay home. And you know what? Notre Dame, they obviously beat out Clemson for a player like this. And that might show the effect of Venables leaving, that maybe South Carolina, which does have players every now and then, is they're not automatically going to go to Clemson anymore.
Yeah, we're going to find out a lot about Clemson because, Tony Elliott is no longer the offensive coordinator. So it's going to be a completely new staff for Dabo Swinney.
That's right. And, Joe, someone else that, after going up there, I've fell in love with this place, and they're like my new number 3 team after Auburn and Ole Miss, and that's, of course, Penn State. I want to give a huge shout out to what James Franklin did. Of course, he's been like Lane Kiffin, where people have put James Franklin's name with every open vacancy in America, and apparently, people just think that he was going to leave Penn State. I told you when I was there, I never thought he was actually going to leave Penn State because of just what an amazing place it is. Well, look at what he has done. He's got the number 6 overall class in America. You were going to talk about that recruiting from within, keeping the players there. He's got Sean Clifford now for his 25th season as Penn State's quarterback. He's going to stay there and play again. Really, in all honesty, it's going to be a 6th season. And so I think Penn State's going to be a program to watch out for. And looking at the kind of players they got, when Sean Clifford does finally leave, I think 6 years, he's got to exhaust his eligibility next year. James Franklin went in and brought a 5-star quarterback in, number 27 player in America, Drew Adler out of Ohio. So he was able to beat out a guy that probably Ohio State, I'm sure, was on. And, starting with that quarterback position, it looks like they're going to be in solid hands when Clifford leaves. Running back, that was something that, a lot of people said what kept Penn State from maybe not making the college football playoff this year was a lack of a run game. And so he went out, he got a 4-star running back out of Pennsylvania. So probably the number 1, Pennsylvania player is a running back, top 50 guy, Nicholas Singleton, got him. And so I'm looking at really good recruiting, and it's all pretty regional too. I'm seeing Pennsylvania, Ohio, Maryland. So I got to say that's a very impressive job by James Franklin in a year where, they had a lot of expectations. They didn't meet it. And then all Penn State people could hear about is how Franklin was going to leave them. And suddenly he brings in the top 6 recruiting class.
Yeah, I think that was an important momentum shift for Penn State to get that recruiting class. I still agree with you. I think that there's a lot of promise for James Franklin's tenure at Penn State. I know that the 2020 season also was a little bit rocky to start out with, but, they kind of recovered down the stretch that season. This year, didn't meet expectations, but at the same time, you just kind of feel like Penn State under him is always going to be there where they could, just any given year pull off that 10 or 11 win season.
That's right. And Joe, now I want to switch and what we're talking about before we get to the highlight of the show for us, and for probably most people that listen to our shows know we like Auburn and Ole Miss, and that's what we talk about. I want to get to some of the surprising teams that we see. We talked about Notre Dame in Texas being surprising, but this is a whole different level. Of course, Notre Dame and Texas are blue bloods. They're classic college football programs. Here's some people that I cannot believe I am saying they have classes ranked where they are. First, looking just outside the top 10, how about Kentucky at number 11? Mark Stoops was, of course, mentioned for a lot of jobs, the Oklahoma job, the LSU job. He's done such an amazing, job at Kentucky and building it slowly and doing it with a lot of defense, running the ball. And he's really elevated that program to where I would say consistently over the last 5 years, you can make an argument they've been the second best program after Georgia, which is crazy to say, but I mean, I think that's probably true. Florida's been so up and down, it's hard for me to say they've consistently been better than Kentucky the last 5 years. And now he's got the number 11 overall recruiting class. And let's see what kind of players he got. He's got a wide receiver that's a 4-star. I mean, talk about that out of Nashville, Tennessee. So, I mean, that's really great. When Kentucky's getting 4-star wide receivers, that's one thing they actually haven't really had while Stoops has been there. They haven't really had a dynamic receiver. They've had some great running backs. Of course, Benny Snell was fantastic. Courvoisier, Smoke, and Rodriguez last year were good running backs. But he hasn't had a dynamic playmaking wide receiver. And now we see they've got Berrien Brown from Nashville that's a 4-star wide receiver. So that's a good start for his, for his recruiting class. And then you look here, of course, what you would expect to see with high-level Kentucky recruits, an edge rusher out of Pittsburgh, and then a linebacker out of Tennessee. And so it looks like he's making some real inroads in Tennessee recruiting and just strengthening what has always been a very good defense under him at Kentucky.
Oh, absolutely. And to your point about the wide receivers, I would say it's been like a decade since Randall Cobb was on the team that Kentucky's really had, a household name at wide receiver.
Yeah, and Joe, here's probably what I think would be the most important recruit I'm seeing in this class right here. Dane Key, another wide receiver that is a 4-star wide receiver out of Lexington, Kentucky. 6'2", 190. That is a great hold down because you know what? That's a sign that your program is really taking the next step. When you got a kid in your town that is a 4-star recruit and he doesn't do what Christian Harris from Alabama did, the great running back that plays for the Patriots did, and bail on Kentucky. Doesn't do what Mac Jones does. He was a guy that was committed to Kentucky, then bailed to go to Alabama. You got a hometown boy that stayed there. And so that's a really big that's a really big coup for Mark Stoops and shows what he's done with that Kentucky program.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. And, they're never going to run him out like they're ready to build a statue for him. It just kind of depends on how long he wants to be there and how happy he is. And it seems like he's recruiting great.
That's right, Joe. And the biggest surprise that I see in all of these rankings is Mizzou at number 12. I mean, what an amazing job of recruiting we're seeing right now with Missouri, and off of a very disappointing season. I mean, I think they made a bowl game. Not sure if they were 6-6 or 5-7, if they got one of the offers for 5-7 teams. But Missouri had a very poor defense, lost to Boston College. Not a whole lot to be excited about, but the number 1 receiver in America out of East St. Louis, Illinois, Luther Burden, is going to be a Missouri Tiger. And I'd heard word that this guy was going to sign with them, but I didn't believe it till I saw it. And what a huge statement that is for Missouri to get that player to come stay in the friendly confines of Missouri.
Oh yeah, like you don't remember much about them getting good receivers since Dorial Green Beckham a few years ago.
That's right. Yeah, Dorial Green Beckham would be the best that I can think of. And Joe, he's got a 4-star quarterback out of Sewanee, Georgia. Sam Horn, the 6'4", 190, and he went into Georgia and got a 4-star quarterback. Now that's something right there. And apparently Eli Drinkowitz has like an amazing personality. He's kind of funny, and you can tell that he's really selling himself on this recruiting trail because he went into Georgia and got a player. That's pretty hard right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It is. And I think, this is big for the Missouri program because, when they first joined the SEC, they kind of surprised everybody by winning a couple of SEC East titles in their second and third year, respectively. And then they kind of went flat, had some issues, and then they kind of got back going offensively, but their defense has always been a question. And so now, like, maybe it's coming together. I know this year they went, like 6-6. They're going to a bowl game. Their running game was good, but just not really good anywhere else. And so, obviously the SEC is so strong that like somebody's got to lose, but there is some promise here for Missouri.
Absolutely, Joe. And I mean, it looks like their offense is only getting better with their top three players being a wide receiver, a quarterback, and a running back, which they got out of Texas. Yeah, another good recruiting move right there to go outside the footprint a little bit, get a player from Texas. And I'm seeing that they do have a 4-star defensive lineman, Marquise Graciel, out of St. Charles, Missouri. So that's good. So they're going to improve that defense a little bit with a big player like that. So great job by Eli Drinkowitz, and what I would say is the most surprising team that I see near the top of the leaderboard.
I think so.
All right, Joe. Moving on to another team that, has a good day, but I'm not going to talk about any of their players they got. I'm going to talk about the one they didn't get. Florida State's in there at number 13, which, hey, I mean, coming off a 5-7 season, that's not bad. A little bit of momentum under Norvell. They beat Miami. But, Joe, they lost out on the number one player in America, cornerback Hunter out of Florida, and he's going to Jackson State University in Jackson, Mississippi to play for PrimeTime, to play for Deion. And this is the same day, Joe, that Florida State signed an extension with Norvell, which to me is an insane thing to do, to give an extension to a guy who went 5-7 at Florida State, which is a place that should never lose 7 games in a season. I don't know how Florida State is where it is. Doesn't make any sense to me. And now they're losing the number one player in America who's from Florida to Jackson State. I mean, it is the number 13th overall ranked class is great, and you can use that as a selling point. But to me, losing out on this player to Jackson State is a bigger embarrassment than whatever number you have next to your name right now.
Yeah, it was definitely just shockwaves across like the college football world. Jackson State, I know they've got, rich tradition. Like Walter Payton played there. I know you got, Deion Sanders. That obviously makes it unique, having his talent there. I don't think any other coach could have pulled it off. But at the same time, you're still just kind of surprised that, a recruit would not pick Florida State, because I was telling you before the show, the thing about playing like on the FCS level is you don't have as much television exposure. So that's one thing that kind of surprised me here.
Yeah, it is. I mean, now one thing that I was thinking about and that I heard is that if there was anybody that could help you cash out on NIL, it's Deion Sanders. I mean, the guy knows how to market himself. He could help a player like this. And also, if you want to think about projecting a couple of years in the future, this is a cornerback. And I think you can make an argument that Deion Sanders is the greatest cornerback to ever play football.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
And so I think there are things about it that make sense to me. And you got to wonder, what kind of NIL deal this guy got to go to Jackson, Mississippi? Does he have C-Spire? Is he going to be doing C-Spire commercials and Sanderson Farms commercials within the next couple months?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Do you think that if Deion Sanders were to take a job somewhere in a year or two, that he might follow him in the transfer portal?
I would say there's a very high likelihood of that.
So, yeah, really, I mean, there's a good chance this is like him just wanting to sign with Deion more than anything, and then just kind of follow the trajectory of his career.
Absolutely. And Joe, we've been talking about the last few weeks. You and I have been all about Jim Harbaugh and what he's done at Michigan. Well, hey, look at this. He's coming off a really good season where, of course, he could win the national championship. He's in the college football playoff right now, and he brings in a number 9 ranked recruiting class, which is good. I mean, of course, Ohio State's at number 4, but if you have top 10 recruiting classes, you have a chance. You have a chance to win the Big Ten. You have a chance to stay relevant. And I think that's a really solid class right there for Jim Harbaugh. And looking at it, he's just making his defense better, which is what you expect there. His number 1 overall player is a 5-star cornerback out of Michigan. So that's good. He's keeping his good players home right there. And I got to say, I'm happy for Jim Harbaugh to see him signing another top 10 recruiting class.
Yeah, it's going to help kind of build on what they accomplished this year.
That's right. And Joe, speaking on building on what you accomplished this year, I want to use Jim Harbaugh and what he's done with Michigan to juxtapose what's going on with Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss right now. They have the number 25 ranked recruiting class, which I believe, Joe, is either the worst recruiting class or the second worst to Vanderbilt in all of the SEC. And Ole Miss just had their best regular season in the entire history of their football program outside of course, the national championships in the 60s. So what's been going on with Lane Kiffin recruiting? I mean, all we see on Twitter all the time is Lane Kiffin showing pictures of the back of the states that he's in with license plates. What are you doing when you go to those states? Is it recruiting? Because it doesn't look like it right now.
It's hard to get a really good read on it. Like the positive spin is that they're not really satisfied with some of the players they were looking at out of high school, and so they're saving up spots for the transfer portal. You know, we mentioned Dylan Gabriel and players like that. We saw this year, you know, them bring in Chance Campbell and Springer, you know, some great impactful defensive players from the portal. But the negative spin is like, are they having trouble, you know, with high school recruiting? The first two classes he had at Ole Miss weren't all that good either. They had a couple of good players, you know, at the top of the class both years, but the excuse was both of those years, first, it's Kiffin's first recruiting class. He didn't have a whole lot of time getting hired. And then last year, he kind of had the pandemic excuse. But now in year three, like you would expect the top 5 or top 10 class on, you know, coming off what they accomplished.
Yeah, Joe, let me read you the teams that are around Ole Miss in the recruiting rankings. We have above them, we've been talking about how this guy has been just like destroying it in every way and just surprising us because you and I kind of thought he was a bad hire when it happened. Shane Beamer in South Carolina are ranked ahead of Ole Miss in recruiting right now. Number 23 is South Carolina. That should not happen right now. Oh, and by the way, fresh off just absolutely beating their brakes off in the Egg Bowl, Mississippi State has a higher ranked recruiting class than Ole Miss right now at 22. I mean, what is Kiffin doing?
No, it's definitely a concern. I mean, don't get me wrong. They got a few players. Like this is what I would say about Ole Miss recruiting class. It's top heavy, but it doesn't have a whole lot of depth. Mm-hmm. I'm excited about 2 or 3 of the defensive players they signed. They got, I think, Willis at linebacker. I think is really good 4-star.
Yeah.
And I think Harris is going to be just a freak of nature as a pass rusher. I think he's like 6'8", 335. So they got some really good developmental pieces at the top, but you just don't have the depth. And then you kind of have, you know, trying to figure out what they can do with the transfer portal. If they don't hit some home runs at the transfer portal and bring in, you know, 3 or 4 high-profile players, like it's really going to be, you know, a big question mark.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, if he goes out and he gets Dylan Gabriel and he gets some other big-time guys that are off the transfer portal, then, you know, I guess you can justify these decisions. But, Joe, even with doing that, they should have a better class than this. That doesn't really explain this.
Well, yeah, it's puzzling. And, you know, you can't just gamble on doing this every year with the transfer portal because, like, if you don't have depth in your class, like, you're just like not having depth is a big problem.
It is. But, Joe, I do want to talk about one player in particular, and I've heard really great things about this guy. Quinshawn Judkins is a running back out of Pike Road, Alabama, which is Montgomery suburb. And Pike Road has become kind of one of the new powers in Alabama high school football. They had just an unbelievable team this year, and it's only getting better. And I've heard that the Judkins is just an absolute beast, and that could be a real good player for Ole Miss in the future. So there is a running back to look forward to for sure.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And so it does look like he's doing a good job of, you know, getting into the middle Alabama recruiting area because he also has Jarrell Stinson out of Opelika, which, of course, Opelika is the sister city to Auburn. So he went in there and got a 4-star player from away from Auburn. So that's good right there, too. So, I mean, there are some positives you can take from it. But I got to say I'm very, very disappointed in this class right now.
Yeah.
And, Joe, that's a perfect parlay into Auburn, which was a class that until 10 hours ago I was highly disappointed with. And I will give Harsin this. He really, you know, one of the biggest question marks he had coming in was, is the guy going to be an elite SEC recruiter? He comes from Idaho. He played at Boise State. He, you know, obviously has all these West Coast connections. Is he going to be able to get there in the nitty gritty and go against Alabama, Georgia, LSU and get players? And, you know, his first recruiting class, he did a decent job. I think Auburn finished 17 or 18. Yet again, he'd only been, the coach for a couple of weeks by that time, so we weren't expecting much. This one all year round, all year long, I kept seeing Auburn in the 30s in recruiting. And as an Auburn fan, I expect to have a top 10 recruiting class every year. That's something I expect. Gus was doing that. Gene Chisley did it. That's something that you can do and that people have done. And so I was very frustrated by this. And of course, with the end of the season, of course, with Bo Nix entering the transfer portal, even though I'm not really upset about it. I don't like the look of it for the program. That's all it was. I was starting to get a little bit upset with Harsin as a coach. But I got to say, I'm really impressed with the way that he cobbled together what ended up being a good recruiting class. And Auburn right now is listed at number 14, which isn't where I want us to be. But, it's definitely an improvement. And he addressed some needs. He didn't address all the needs, but of course he's got a 4-star quarterback, which I've heard really good things about, and Holden Geriner out of Savannah, Georgia, that a lot of people are very high on. So that's going to be a good thing. Could be a guy who could, if TJ Finley is not the guy, fills in next year, or maybe after another year of Finley, he could beat him out. So that's a good thing. And then the biggest thing that he did today is he actually had a player flip from Alabama to Auburn. Now that's a big coup right there for a second-year head coach who, of course, didn't win the Iron Bowl, had a 6-6 record. He had a kid out of Mobile, Alabama, my hometown, that actually flipped to him. And that's the highest-ranked player in their class, Robert Woodyard, who's a linebacker out of Williamson High School, which has been very good to Auburn. There's the connection there. Roger McCreary, who's about to be a first-round draft pick for Auburn at quarterback, he played at Williamson High School. Going further back, we had a really good defensive end when I was at Auburn that played at Williamson High School. It was also a tight end when I was in Auburn. That was in Williamson High School. There's definitely a connect there, but still, it's a guy that was a Alabama commitment until signing day, and he got flipped to Auburn. So that's a big coup. And you see what he finishes out with. He finishes out with a number 14 ranked class. And not only beat out Alabama for Woodyard, he got a guy in Austin Osbury that's from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, whose dad played at LSU, who's a cornerback, is now going to be an Auburn Tiger. So he's going to get some of the big boys and taking them. And so while it's not a top 5, it's not a top 10 class, I'm liking that he seems like he's not scared to take on the biggest and baddest and get some of their players.
Well, the good news, too, is that building off your points, the fact that he made up a lot of ground over a short period of time, like went up like 20 spots in the rankings, like that's encouraging. Like he didn't fall back. He didn't just kind of moderately move up. And so that wave of momentum, while, you want the top 10 class, still turned out to be, pretty good.
That's right. And Joe, here's another one that's very important right here in terms of these recruiting battles that you have. You want to beat LSU for players. You want to beat Georgia for players. You want to beat Alabama for players. There's another one that Auburn is always in constant tussles with for players historically, and that a lot of times they've lost out on. And this is going to be the second time I'll mention these guys losing out on homegrown talent. Auburn got Trey Donaldson, who goes to the Florida State University High School in Tallahassee, Florida, who's a safety, to come to Auburn. He's a 4-star. So there you go. Not just losing the number 1 overall player, Hunter, going to Jackson State. You're also losing a safety that goes to Auburn. And now it's a guy in Tallahassee. And that's a big recruiting win for Auburn because, like I said, historically, Auburn has been in almost as many battles with Florida State as they have been with Alabama and Georgia for players.
And you said the name of his high school actually includes Florida State in the name?
Yeah, it's the Florida State University High School in Tallahassee.
Yeah, that hurt even more to lose a player like that.
Right. So, like I said, I got to say that while I would probably give a D+ or a C- to Harsin's first year as a head coach in terms of what was done on the field, got to say I'm going to give him a B- for his recruiting class. And that's not bad considering that it was in the D+ range before today. So definitely a huge upgrade that he had.
Yeah, right.
The only thing that I wish that I'm looking at this recruiting class that doesn't have a whole lot of that I would like to see is Auburn is very thin at the offensive line and they are decimated at wide receiver. I mean, I think wide receiver, that's the reason that they weren't really competing for the SEC West and why they lost many games, why they lost the Penn State games, why they lost the Texas A&M game. Probably why they lost the Alabama game. I mean, it makes a big difference, and I don't see a lot of really that many wide receivers in this class. And so, the biggest negative I would put towards it is the lack of additional wide receiver depth.
Yeah, and maybe he's got some people in mind in the transfer portal, but otherwise, it would be a disappointment if they're not able to strengthen that position.
Absolutely, it would be a disappointment if you don't catch us for our next set. When we come back, we're gonna talk a little bit about college football bowl season, and by that, Joe and I are just gonna go through. We've got 25 games we picked out, and we're gonna pick the winner or loser. And something that Joe and I always do this time of year is we have our bowl pool challenge between each other, reigning champion right here, and the loser has to wear a hat or a shirt of their most hated rival. In Joe's case, it's Mississippi State. In mine, I mean, it's really kind of flip-flops between Alabama and Georgia. This year, I'm choosing it to be Georgia. So if Joe beats me in this year's bowl pool challenge, I'll wear a Georgia something, which I will get from my friend who's the tortured Georgia friend, Kyle.
Sounds good.
And catch us for that. And like I said, listen to all of our episodes on Spotify. Look at the Dan and Joe Sports Show on Spotify. Subscribe to our Facebook page, or subscribe to our YouTube page, and you can see our most recent videos. And then, of course, you can also like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at DJ Sports Show. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.